Welcome to the Oracle Class 311, More Stories from the Secret City. I'm Ray Smith, and I've got with me today Todd Ryder, who's going to be sharing information about the German nuclear program. He's the person that's done the most research that I'm aware of that history and has been able to bring out information that has not been shared previously and not been available until just a little while ago. An in-depth research, and I'd like to share that with you. We've had him on before, so you all may well, some of you may well remember Todd, but I'm glad to have him here today. So, Todd, with that said, you can go ahead and start your presentation. Oh, let me remind folks, I know he's putting up slides and I know it looks like a formal presentation, but Todd would be glad to entertain questions as he's going along. Just unmute yourself or either put it in the chat and I'll ask him. I'll watch the chat. But please ask questions as we go along, and I think we'll all get more out of it if you'll do that. Okay, Todd, take it away.
All right. Well, Ray, thank you very much for inviting me back. I really appreciate it. And as you said, if anybody has any questions or suggestions along the way, please jump in at any point. Just blurt it out or ding or send in a text, Ray, any way you want to do it. I'll answer questions along the way. So I've discussed the German nuclear program on several of Ray's previous programs. And since Ray has been a tour guide at many nuclear installations and sites in the United States, I wanted to show you some of the apparently quite interesting nuclear installations that are now in Germany. So maybe Ray can lead you guys on tours here at some point in the future. And for starters, let me remind people that during World War II, for much of the war, Germany controlled almost all of Europe. And as a result, there are German sites, including German nuclear sites, that are spread all over continental Europe. And here is an example. This is a report from the OSS, Wartime Spy Agency. They had a very highly placed spy that was able to hobnob with various high-ranking German industrialists. And these German industrialists confided in late 1944 to this OSS spy that, oh, yes, we're building atomic bombs. And rather than building all of our atomic bombs in one central place, one above ground factory, kind of like Oak Ridge that the Allies could bomb easily, we're clever. We're doing it in a number of distributed places, and most of these places are underground. So here they actually admitted it. Now, this OSS spy and his sources didn't name the specific sites, but from a number of other documents, I'm going to show you a lot of apparently very, very interesting nuclear sites in Germany. The other thing to realize is that even though these sites were spread all over Europe, they were particularly concentrated in what was known as the Greater German Reich, kind of what the Germans regarded as their enlarged country during the war. And so that is the modern country of Germany, but also Austria down here, and Czech Republic and Poland. And there are so many different sites that today I'll only talk about the sites that are within the modern borders of Germany. But if you want, I can come back some point in the future and tell you about all these other fabulous tourist destinations and give you brochures and everything. So here, within the modern borders of Germany, are some of the major sites. Even these, we don't have time to talk about all of these, but I want to point out some of the major ones for which there's a lot of documentation. And of course, some of these are well known. Peenemünde rocket launching site up here in the north, and Nordhausen, large underground rocket factory you can tour. But a lot of these will not be familiar to most people. Here are some of the main ones I want to talk about, and little towns called things like Neustadt an der Orla and Pozneck, Friedrichshafen, which is a nice town by a lake in southern Germany, Lüneburger Heide, which is south of Hamburg, and areas in Saxony where they were mining uranium, areas near Magdeburg where they were doing nuclear work, and several others. And if you are looking for information on these sites, if you don't want to take notes at a furious pace during this, you can find all these slides, everything on my website. So writerinstitute.org, you'll find all these slides and a whole lot more. So there are a couple towns called Neustadt an der Orla and Pozneck, and nobody's ever heard of them, but they are in eastern Germany. And for reference, closest things you might recognize, here is the town of Weimar, as in the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. Here's Jena, longtime home of the Zeiss optics company, made microscopes and camera lenses and things. Erfurt, fairly decent sized town, but there are a lot of smaller little towns around here and villages. And there seem to have been some very interesting nuclear and rocket sites in these locations during the war. Here in particular is Neustadt an der Orla and the nearby village of Pozneck. And this is a report that I found at the National Archives in College Park. And this is from April 1945 as U.S. troops were moving into the area, and reports that there was an underground factory in this location in eastern Germany. This factory was underground. It was so large and employed 20 to 30,000 workers underground. And they were making not the V1, not the V2, not even the V3, but they were making the V4, which they describe as a two-man rocket. So they were making it at this factory and then shipping it to another factory at nearby Weimar. And I found a lot of these reports at the National Archives. Here are more reports, even gives the specific coordinates, map coordinates, where this factory was. And it makes it clear that this was not the better-known Nordhausen factory. This was something else. This is another huge, advanced underground rocket factory. More reports of this from the U.S. Troops in early April. And so using those map coordinates, we can locate where this factory was reported to be. And there's Neustadt an der Orla and nearby Pozneck. So it turns out right in there. And to my knowledge, it's not currently a major tourist attraction. So it seems to be buried underground, just waiting for some good Indiana Jones to come up and dig it up. As you saw, they were employing 20 to 30,000 workers from various nationalities. Many of those were French captured workers. And as soon as they were all released, when the Americans moved into the area, then the French went back to Paris and did what French do, which is to write a whole newspaper article about the experience, how we were building the V4 for Hitler, and to complain furiously about the quality of the food there. Now, one of the scientists who was working on this seems to have been Heinz Stölzl, and nobody's ever heard of him, but here he is in his military uniform. And this is a very famous photo from 1942. The rocket scientists were being congratulated after the first successful flight of the V2 or the A4 rockets. Here is Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger, but this is Heinz Stölzl, 1942. Later in the war, he seems to have been posted to this area that I'm talking about in eastern Germany. So here is a letter for him, postmarked and indicated for Erfurt. So he was working someplace in that area. And when he died, he left behind a lot of drawings, a lot of blueprints showing a rocket, but not just a standard V2 rocket. This is a more advanced version. And it has two astronauts in it. It has two pilots in it. So this is the two-man rocket. Seems to be the same one that was described in those wartime U.S. documents. So this appears to be what was being mass-produced in that underground factory there. That shows that this rocket was designed to be launched from Germany and then to re-enter over the United States and to deliver quite a surprising boom to New York City. That was the goal. Here are more blueprints. These are captured by the Russians, but showing this two-stage, basically an ICBM that seems to have been mass-produced in this area. And as further support for this, this is from the New York Times. So New York Times, October 1944, well before the end of the war, the New York Times openly published that according to their sources they'd talked to in Europe, the reporters from the New York Times could report that Germany was developing an atomic bomb and described in some detail. This was an implosion atomic bomb, and it had electrical igniters to trigger the implosion from the outside and simultaneously sent an electrical signal to a neutron initiator at the center of the device. So describes it in great gory detail and says that this bomb was to be delivered by a two-man rocket, which was currently undergoing tests in Germany and Austria. Then, once the war was over, eventually this whole area was turned over to the Russians, but the Americans occupied it briefly. And during that time, the Americans wrote a report about this underground factory at Poznek in this area. Here is the cover letter for that report. I would love to show you the report itself, but I can't because it's still classified. It's still unavailable. So if this never existed, or if this was not terribly interesting, then why is the report still classified here 80 some odd years later? But wait, there's more. This fabulous tourist destination of Neustadt an der Orla was not only making ICBM rockets, they were making something else. These are the handwritten notes of Mo Berg, the very famous baseball player turned OSS CIA spy. So he was wandering around Europe taking notes. And here in his handwritten notes, he says that at Neustadt an der Orla, there were factories that were producing some of the world's very best nickel membrane filters for IG Farben, nickel wire mesh, nickel membrane filters. Now, since you folks are around in Oak Ridge, have you ever heard of nickel membrane filters being used for anything in Oak Ridge? Yeah, so Ray's heard of it. For uranium enrichment, people often use uranium hexafluoride, which is quite corrosive. And nickel is one of the things that can stand up to uranium hexafluoride without being corroded. So for things like the Oak Ridge K25 gaseous diffusion facility, they had nickel membrane filters. And world-leading technology to be able to do that. Here is this small little factory in this small little village in Germany that is mass producing some of the world's very best nickel membrane filters. And so it raises the question, why were they doing that during the war? And then after the war, as shown by the CIA reports, they turned around and started making and selling these nickel membrane filters to the Russians. And so this was the very best supplier of nickel membrane filters for the Russian gaseous diffusion uranium enrichment facilities after the war. So several different CIA reports on this. And then nickel wire mesh filters for gaseous diffusion. And related to this, during the war, several of the Manhattan Project scientists wrote to Leslie Groves. So here's a letter from January 1944. And Samuel Allison, several other scientists wrote to Groves that these Manhattan Project scientists themselves, believed that Germany was ahead of the United States in gaseous diffusion technology for these sorts of reasons. Now, nearby, there were other things, so not in that particular town, but towns close by, I showed on the map. There were other mysterious underground facilities, and they may have been producing heavy water and doing other things. Here's an example of an underground factory near there that we do know about. This is the relatively well-known Kala, and this was an underground factory for Messerschmitt jets. So here it is during the war, huge underground factory producing these two-jet engine, twin-engine fighter jets. And here is as it looks nowadays, abandoned but still visible. And people sometimes sneak in and wander around and take photos. You can see the size of the person here compared to the overall size of the room. There's a person there for the size of the room. So cool place. If anybody ever gets to visit there and finds anything, or if you find anything in archives, please let me know. Any questions so far? See, I could write a whole Alone on the Planet all about this stuff. Now let's move on to Friedrichshafen. And down here, this is southern Germany. So here is southern Germany right here. There's this giant, beautiful lake. And this is Switzerland here. Here's Austria over here. And if you squint, you can see Julie Andrews right there. So on the German side of the lake, this is Friedrichshafen. And this town became famous as the location of the Zeppelin factory. So in the 1890s, the Graf Zeppelin settled here and built a giant factory to build his airships. And so by World War II, this is a very well-developed aerospace, military, industrial area. There's also a Dornier factory nearby. And here's Friedrichshafen proper on the lake, but nearby are little villages with names like Unterroderock and Oberroderock, and you'll see these show up on some of the documents. So since this was an already established military and aerospace area for decades before World War II, during the war, it began producing secretly all kinds of amazing stuff. Underground factories were built here, employing thousands of prisoners. What they were producing was so secret that it was carried out on freight cars that were all sealed up so nobody could peek inside. And here were reports from people who had worked there and from prisoners of war saying what they were producing was a rocket, but a rocket that was so large it required 3 railroad cars to carry one rocket. Now the V2, the better known V2 rocket, was designed to be small enough it could fit on one railroad car. So this was a rocket that required 3 railroad cars, a huge, huge rocket. And this is in 1943 and 1944. Here are other reports of massive rockets being produced in this area, 25-ton rockets, huge rockets, very secret, according to the prisoners of war there. And then after the war, Allied investigators went into this area and started interviewing people. And these people said, oh yeah, during the war, we were building larger propellant tanks for larger rockets, but of course we never did anything with it. And we were talking about launching people on these rockets, like a 2-man rocket, but of course we never did anything with it. Here are more reports. This is from Alan Dulles, another famous CIA spy, and reporting that near this town at Oberroderock, they were working with very scary chemical stuff, chemical weapons or rocket propellant or nuclear things. It's not quite clear what. And a report from Leslie Grove's files that on the lake itself, not just Friedrichshafen on the coast, but on the lake itself, there was a lab on an island doing Azusa work. Azusa was the OSS code name for German nuclear weapons work. So March 1945. And more reports of this. Here's a report that at Unterroderock near Friedrichshafen, there's an underground factory that was constructed. They're doing strange experiments. It causes a red glow at night, heavy clouds during the day. The experiments cause the earth to shake. They're doing experiments with atoms. And when the experiments prove successful, the plant went into operation. It's so secretive that even the people who work there are never allowed to leave the factory. They sleep inside the factory. And so it suggests that this may have been a nuclear reactor at this location. That would explain all the above. Here's a little map, courtesy of the French, showing exactly where this was, if anybody wants to go exploring these days. And here's another list from Leslie Grove's files showing Oberradrock on a list of known or reported German nuclear sites. The question is, what was there? And Friedrichshafen as well. Any questions so far? Let's move on. Here is Lüneburger Heide. And this is an area that is south of Hamburg. So huge, huge city of Hamburg. And so we're a little ways south of there. And there are a couple of other nearby towns that pop up in this, so Bergen and Celle here as well. And this area south of Hamburg is not really populated. If you go out there, it's just kind of bushes and forest. If this were the United States, we would call this a state park or a national park. And it seems to have been the location for some secretive underground factories during the war, doing nuclear stuff. For starters, here is a report from just after the war ended in Europe, so July 45, again from Leslie Grove's files, Manhattan Project, Francis Smith, reporting that at Hamburg, they had found a large pile, a sizable pile of uranium. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are no other known reports of reactors or other uses for uranium in that area. So why is there a sizable pile of Congolese high-quality uranium sitting in Hamburg at the end of the war? What were they doing with that during the war? Here's more information. This is from an OSS agent named Frederick Loofborough. And he had recruited spies all over Germany. So these spies reported to him. He reported to the OSS, to DC. And so 1943, he and his spy network were receiving reports that from towns on the periphery of Lüneburger Heide, this area again just south of Hamburg, there were hundreds or even thousands of workers who were secretly employed in underground factories there, vast underground factories, producing a very secret, very new type of explosive. And this new type of explosive had to be used in special bombs that were spherical. Usually a bomb is designed to be aerodynamic, so it's designed to be oblong. The only reason to make a spherical bomb is because the physics compels you to make a spherical bomb. So can you folks think of any famous spherical bombs that the US built during World War II? So spherical bombs here with a very special new explosive. And in addition to underground factories producing this stuff, they were also building a lot of runways nearby so that planes could load up and carry away these bombs and deliver them to Allied targets. Here's another report, similar, and says that this special new explosive they were producing was so powerful that only 1 kilogram of this explosive would have a blast radius of approximately 4 kilometers. And everything within the 4 kilometer blast radius would be razed away or disintegrated to dust and ashes. We see a similar indication here. The employees are not allowed to leave the factories. They eat and sleep in specially equipped rooms in the factories. We've seen that before for other factories, all for the same program. And then after the war, many of these folks were captured by the Americans, but also many were captured by the Russians. So Werner Vector was a high-ranking German official who was captured by the Russians and interrogated by them and ultimately executed by them. But he was trying to save his life. He was telling them all about everything before he was executed and described how in this very area we're talking about that there were aircraft intended for bombing the Soviet Union and other Allied targets with atomic bombs, exactly as we saw from the CIA's intelligence. So there's an airfield at nearby town of Cella, ready to load up with these very special bombs, these atomic bombs. And they were getting ready to use their apparently mass-produced atomic bombs to deliver strikes on Allied targets at the very moment that the war ended. Then from Otto Hahn, a famous Nobel Prize winning scientist, he talks about how he'd been in touch with another Nobel Prize winning German scientist. And the two of them vouched that at the end of the war, at Lüneburger Heide, just south of Hamburg, they knew, their sources knew, that there were at least 3 German nuclear bombs that had been built and were ready to be used if they were called up. Here is another report from the U.S. military discussing weapons, an aerial torpedo of some sort being produced, being stored at Lüneburger Heide. And then the British also moved into this area after the war. So here's from a British publication in 1946, the British Army saying, just, recounting the last days of the war, what happened when the British troops moved in, that, oh yeah, we moved into this area and we found a factory engaged in production work for the German atomic bomb. And then the next day we went off and partied. They don't really discuss any more about this. There must be detailed reports about this, but they're still unavailable. Then after the war, here's another Allied report on the same area. So Allied investigators, British investigators, after the war came across an SS guard who had worked at this facility. And the guard was still guarding a scientist who'd been captured and had been working at this facility. And so the scientist described his work on nuclear weapons and other projects at this, what he called Camp Mecklenburg at Lüneburger Heide, and talked about how he'd worked for the SS General Hans Kammler in charge of German nuclear weapons on this project. Another report from Alan Dulles that at Lüneburger Heide, they were working on the weapons, also means for delivering the weapons, special 4-engine jet-propelled bombers to carry these weapons long range. More reports of this. A prisoner was captured by the Americans in May 45 and described how he had information from Lüneburger Heide on the so-called atom-splitting bomb that had a very large blast radius and had been tested. And so it appears from all these sources that there's some kind of underground facility in this area at Lüneburger Heide. And then after the war, the U.S. hired one of the key engineers who had helped to build these super secret underground facilities. His name was Carl Fiebinger, and he worked with Hans Kammler and others to build these underground facilities. He came to the United States as part of Paperclip and related programs and helped to build super secret underground facilities in the United States. And along the way, he was debriefed, wrote reports about some, not all, but some of the underground facilities in Germany and the rest of Europe that he'd been worked on and was acquainted with. And so here's a map from Carl Fiebinger showing known underground facilities. And notice here is one at Lüneburger Heide. So Lüneburger Heide here, underground facility. This is the British Field Marshal Montgomery accepting the German surrender at Lüneburger Heide in early May 1945. So we know that all these British troops, American troops, German troops all met up. They turned over the area. There must be detailed reports of exactly what was found, exactly what was disclosed, what showed up in the interrogations. But all those reports, all those interrogation transcripts seem to still be classified and unavailable. That doesn't stop people from trying to dig into this area. Again, it's kind of a remote, rural state park type area. But some modern Germans have gone digging here. And they've not dug all the way down to underground factories, but they were just digging in topsoil and discovered there's all kinds of really, really nasty chemical stuff here, chemical weapons, goodness knows what else. So a good warning to be careful if you do go poking into these places. Any questions so far? Holler if you do. Let's move on to a different part of Germany. This is Saxony. And so the question is how much uranium was mined from this area during the war? So for reference, this is Saxony. Here's the best known city, Dresden. You'll remember the firebombing of Dresden. And we're talking about uranium mining towns nearby. And this is Germany up here. And then here's the border. And this is Czech territory down here in the lower right. Of course, the Czech territory was occupied by Germany during the war. And there was a well-known Czech uranium mine at Yakimov or Yakimstal here on the Czech side of the border. What many modern people are less aware of is that there were even richer uranium mines on the German side of the border. And these uranium mines on the German side were in East Germany after the war. These were extensively used by the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union mined somewhere around 200,000 tons of pure uranium from these mines in Germany and carted it back to the Soviet Union and used that to construct much of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. But an open question is how much these mines were exploited by the Germans themselves during the war. So on the post-war work, this is from a couple of historians of uranium mining, just pointing out the Soviets showed up here immediately after the war, started mining or continued the mining, and ultimately got over 231,000 tons of uranium from this area. And here are CIA reports from after the war showing that this was indeed a hugely important uranium mining area for the Soviets under what they called the Vismut Corporation. But this area was active long before the Cold War. So here is a document again from Leslie Grove's files indicating that this area was mining uranium and mining uranium back as early as the 19th century and then continued into the early 20th century. So they were mining uranium well before World War II and likely continued mining uranium here during World War II. More reports on this, these various mines in this area, and they were active going back well before the war. More reports on this, mines in this area, and began mining here like 1870, mining tons and tons of uranium. More reports, detailed descriptions, map coordinates, exactly where the uranium mines are. More on this. And they were not only mining uranium here, but they were setting up laboratories here, nuclear laboratories. So here is a report of a wartime German nuclear lab set up in this area to study or perhaps to process what they were mining in this area. And here is an interrogation transcript from Wilhelm Voss, who was a German industrialist who worked with Hans Kammler in the German nuclear program. And he describes Kammler's top people, top staff, including one person who was an expert on these uranium mining areas in Saxony. More reports about uranium mining here. and more reports. This uranium was mined and then it was shipped to different sites to be processed to turn the uranium ore into pure uranium oxide, uranium metal, uranium hexafluoride. It was shipped to a number of sites, and one of those sites was in Austria, a company called Tribacher. So here's a post-war report where they visited the Tribacher facility in Austria and found that they had on hand some of this Saxony uranium that they'd obtained during the war. And after the war, Leslie Groves was naturally very paranoid about any uranium sources that the Russians or anyone else might be able to get their hands on. The US wanted a monopoly in this area. But this book on the history of uranium mining points out how Leslie Groves had somehow overlooked during the war and immediately after the war the rich uranium deposits here that had been discovered and used by the Germans even during the war. This is part of an interview with Heinrich Himmler's chief adjutant Werner Grothmann, and he mentioned that during the war, they were not only mining uranium here in Saxony, but they had a uranium enrichment facility here, especially built by the SS and operational in Saxony. So cool area there. Again, it's near Dresden. If you guys ever want to go visit, I think it's a good hiking area. It's mountainous here. It's called the Ore Mountains or the Erzgebirge, but a very scenic spot to go. And let me know if you find any uranium or anything there. Any questions? All right, moving right along, Magdeburg. And so here is a fairly large city of Hanover, and then nearby is Magdeburg and smaller places. Here's the Nordhausen tourist attraction rocket factory underground, Leipzig down here, but Halle, Stassfurt, and Braunschweig or Brunswick here. So you'll see these locations show up in some of the documents. And after the war, the United States was visiting different locations in occupied Germany and sent in investigators. They were taking inventory, and they found that at Braunschweig, one of those towns I just showed you, there was the Buchler Company, which was also processing uranium. They'd received a lot of uranium from these various uranium mines, and they were processing it into different forms that could be useful for enrichment and for reactors. Back to this earlier report, you saw it mentioned not only Lüneburger Heide, but it also mentioned that they were doing work here in this Magdeburg area, Magdeburg district, Hildesheim, large explosive factories, also making this very special explosive. And Theodor Suchak was a German who wrote memoirs after the war describing things he'd been involved in or things he had learned from other Germans after the war. And he says that during the war, one of the world's largest, most advanced particle accelerators, cyclotrons, was located at a super secret facility here in the Magdeburg area. And it was either destroyed or taken. He's not quite sure. So that's his story. But in Leslie Groves' files at NARA, I found this. So it reports that there was a cyclotron with 20 million volts housed in this area and seems to have been destroyed or taken. They're not quite sure which. So it agrees with that. So a lot of interesting nuclear stuff in this general geographical area. Here's another prisoner of war report. This was a German who had been working in some of these underground factories, storage facilities in this area, and then was captured by the Allies. So in March 1945, They were interrogating him, finding out what he knew. And he said, oh, he'd been working in one of these places earlier in 45. And he had seen approximately 100 bombs like this. He'd seen them with his own eyes, maybe even handled them, so he drew the thing in detail. And so it shows a bomb about the size of a standard 250 kilogram German bomb, but it's not a conventional bomb. It has a very, very special component that is inserted here in the center at the very last minute. And this very special component is surrounded by a dense metal tamper, very special metal tamper. And that dense metal tamper is surrounded, especially on both ends, by conventional explosives. And so these conventional explosives on each end would be detonated simultaneously. They would create a converging shock wave that would compress this metal tamper, which would compress the very, very special component in the center. So he saw this with his own eyes. He didn't know personally what it was. He said he'd been told, oh, that's a germ bomb. Those are germs there. Don't touch that. You'll get cooties. But it doesn't look like any kind of germ bioweapon bomb I've ever seen. If you put bacteria in the center of this, they'd be smushed and destroyed by the intense heat and pressure there. But what might be the very special component you'd put at the center of a dense metal tamper surrounded by conventional explosives to do implosion? It looks very much like a nuclear bomb. But this is a small nuclear bomb. This is smaller than the Fat Man and Little Boy, even smaller than some of the other German bombs. This is about 250 kilograms. So a tactical bomb. But this prisoner said that he saw about 100 of these things at this place. Now, moving along to other sites, of course, IG Farben was a well-known German chemical consortium. They had many different sites all over Europe. One of their major factories was at Bitterfeld in Germany. And so at IG Farben Bitterfeld, they were producing heavy water. They had multiple plants there to produce heavy water during the war. We know because these plants were removed by the Russians after the war. This same facility, IG Farben Bitterfeld, was also producing very high quality graphite. And both heavy water and graphite make excellent moderators for fission reactors. But wait, there's more. This same facility was also producing massive quantities of very pure calcium. And as you probably know from Oak Ridge, there calcium can be used in purifying uranium metal. And indeed, calcium from this facility was used for purifying other countries' uranium after the war. And this facility was also producing large amounts of high purity aluminum. And aluminum can be quite useful in nuclear reactors and nuclear bombs. And there are indications the same IG Farben Bitterfeld facility may have been producing uranium hexafluoride as well. So here is a prisoner of war interrogation report saying that at IG Farben Bitterfeld, which is a very large factory complex, there was one part that was even more secretive than the others. This underground secretive factory was producing a very dangerous gas, not a nerve gas or something, but very dangerous corrosive gas that sounds an awful lot like uranium hexafluoride. And then IG Farben also had a facility at one of their factories that was highly, highly guarded. Only certain people were allowed in there. And highly fortified facility, concrete, the works. And so it's interesting that IG Farben was producing all these different materials associated with nuclear stuff. So from the uranium itself to the moderators, to the calcium, everything else, producing all those different nuclear materials. And they had something that sounds very much like a nuclear installation, like some sort of reactor or possibly an enrichment setup here. More reports of heavy water production. It's a little place called Mugenberg, that most people don't hear of. And more reports of installations that were processing uranium, so taking uranium from the various uranium mines and purifying that to uranium metal or uranium hexafluoride. So here's a factory just outside Berlin in the Grunau suburb, employing thousands of people to process uranium. And then all this was taken over by the Soviets and stripped out by the Soviets at the end of the war. So if there was no German nuclear program, why did they have all these factories employing all these thousands of people to process and use uranium? Likewise, here is from a different factory, post-war interrogation of people from a Degussa plant in Frankfurt. And they confided to the American interrogators, oh yeah, during the war, we were producing metallic uranium, so taking uranium ore, turning it into pure uranium metal, but not just pure uranium metal, they were deliberately mixing this uranium metal about half and half with carbon. And so they were making at least 10 tons of blocks, where each little block, each little brick was half uranium and half carbon. And if you have nice pure carbon, that is a wonderful moderator. So they're making all these uranium carbon fuel moderator bricks and shipping them someplace. Now, if you read the official history books on the German nuclear program, nobody's ever seen any German reactor, German experiment that was using little bricks that were half uranium, half carbon. So these were going to some reactor that's not even in the history books. And in the Munich area, so southern Germany around Munich, here is a report of super secret underground facilities, heavily camouflaged, heavily guarded, making some sort of super secret new explosive. Similar reports on these factories south in the Munich area, and reports that there were a large number of power plants that had been specially built nearby to provide power for these facilities. Sounds kind of similar to all the power that Oak Ridge consumed during the war. And just to give you more of an overview, I've mentioned some of the uranium mining, especially in Saxony in Germany. But there was also uranium mining in Thuringia in Germany. And then beyond Germany, but in German-controlled areas, in Brussels, the Germans obtained apparently thousands of tons of uranium that the Belgians had dug up in the Congo and transported back to Europe. So the Germans got that very high quality uranium, very similar Congolese uranium to what the US used for much of the Manhattan Project during the war. They were collaborating with uranium mines in Portugal to mine uranium there, transported back to Germany. And uranium mines in Czech territory and Polish territory, in Romanian and Bulgarian territory. And some of these uranium mines, Germany began working as early as 1938. And then, according to US reports, they continued very top priority uranium mining up to the very end of the war at these areas. Then that uranium was processed at a number of facilities. You've seen some of these. So you've seen the Grunau facility just outside Berlin. You've seen IG Farben Bitterfeld. But there were other facilities all over Germany and beyond its borders that were processing uranium. They were making uranium hexafluoride, uranium metal, in different forms. Here's a report from Vienna, someone who was mass producing uranium hexafluoride for the atomic bomb, working for the Luftwaffe in Vienna, completely unheard of in the history books. So there were many different sites that were producing uranium, mining uranium, purifying uranium, and then apparently many different sites that were enriching it. So not just one Oak Ridge, but a lot of many Oak Ridges scattered around and mostly underground, again, to avoid the Allied bombing. And so these documents name many of those different sites. A lot of these have been sealed up for the last 80 some odd years. So it could be very interesting to explore there very carefully and see what is still buried there. Then for the fission reactors, you've seen that at Unterraderach near Friedrichshafen in southern Germany, there was something that sounded very much like a nuclear reactor. And at IG Farben in Leverkusen, there was something that sounded very much like a nuclear reactor. At Hamburg, they were accumulating suspiciously large amounts of Congolese uranium for something that sounds like a fission reactor. But there were other known and reported fission reactors around as well, including ones outside Germany proper, so one in Czech territory and one in Austria, and one in Königsberg, what's now a corner of Russia. And then heavy water, you've seen some heavy water sites in Germany. There were a lot of other heavy water sites in Germany, and many heavy water production sites outside Germany. Of course, one in Norway is well known, Fumork. There were two others in Norway. There was even at least one heavy water site in Sweden, allegedly neutral Sweden, that was shipping heavy water to Germany. And heavy water sites in Italy, Czech territory, Poland, all over the place. And then manufacturers for the bomb components. So thanks to these post-war Allied investigations and the reports that they wrote, we know where most of the components for the German atomic bomb were built. The bomb designs that were obtained discuss very specific components, types of components, and then the Allied investigators in wandering around Germany and Austria happened to find various factories producing components that perfectly match those descriptions. So in Hamburg, there was a company called CHF Mueller that was producing fusion neutron initiators, be perfect for a fission bomb like this, deuterium lithium initiators. In Erlangen, there was the Siemens electrical company that was producing a different type of neutron initiator. And the Auer and Guza companies were producing the uranium. The bomb designs from the Germans mentioned that they had cadmium electroplated aluminum. And so that was produced at certain companies described in these documents. And for the explosive lenses, of course, the US Gadget and Fat Man designs had explosive lenses to focus the implosion. That work began in the United States seriously in late 1944. Here is work from Germany from 1943 on explosive lenses and goes back as early as 1940. So we know where the explosive lenses were produced. So you can find all these different components. And you can make a nice little modern tour around Germany, visiting the sites where all this stuff was produced for the German atomic bomb. And then, of course, the bomb seems to have been tested, and some of the test sites were outside Germany, some were inside Germany. Here is a test site reported in northern Germany. This is on the Baltic coast, and it's now kind of a touristy area. It's a beach type area up on the Baltic coast, probably the little island of Rügen. Here were many different independent witness accounts that in October 1944, Germany successfully conducted a nuclear explosive test up there. And it's difficult to pin down exactly where it is, but the most likely location is this island called Rügen, which is just off the coast of Germany proper. And Rügen is a fairly large and serpentine island, but an especially isolated part of the island here has been a German military base for a long time. And now, purely by coincidence, the German government keeps this completely off limits, so nobody can go there and go poking around this Bug Peninsula. There were other reported German nuclear tests further south in Germany, in Thuringia, Again, many different independent witness reports of this. And we even have photographs. So this seems to have occurred at the Ordroof military testing ground in Thuringia. And from U.S. overflights during the war, here's from August 1944, showing part of this testing ground. And all I want to show you is there's nothing visible here at this location, just field. You can see the roads here on this testing ground, but just field with no marks. So this is August 44. Here is March 45, after the witnesses said something was exploded here. So keep your eye on this spot. I will zoom in and enlarge this spot. And you can see all these radial ejecta lines radiating out from this central spot, kind of like a crater on the moon. And they go out several hundred meters in all directions. So this is one of several suspected craters in this area. If somebody wants to go poking around here and do a lot of soil analysis, if any of you have a good lab. So anyway, thanks to all this information, we know more about the wartime German nuclear program than we used to, but still, of course, not as much as we should. We still don't have the complete picture. And so if any of you are interested, I would highly recommend that you look into this. You can start with my website, with the documents on my website. But then if you're interested, then take it up and go dig in archives yourselves. Even Oak Ridge will have relevant archives, or go to College Park in Maryland, other places. Or if you want, go visit some of these sites in Europe. And if you have the expertise, if you can get funding, if you can get permission, maybe even do archaeological digs, industrial archaeology at some of these sites. Although do it carefully, because you never know quite what might be buried down there. Again, all the slides I just showed you, a whole lot more information is on my website, so writerinstitute.org, if you're looking for all these slides. And I'll stop there. Any questions?
Talk a little bit more, Todd, about forgotten creators. Tell them what that is.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the book is over 6,000 pages now. So if you have trouble sleeping, I highly recommend this to you. It will cure your insomnia. And the German nuclear program is just part of it. So I wanted to look at the history of science, how various scientific discoveries were made, how various engineering inventions were made in the greater German-speaking world. Of course, nowadays we know the names of Einstein and Heisenberg and Werner von Braun with the rockets and so forth. But there were many other various German-speaking scientists and engineers who are not household names now, and created all kinds of products that we use now. So everything from detergents to jet engines, all kinds of different things. And so I wanted to trace the history of these people. Part of that was the German nuclear program, but getting into German chemistry and aerospace engineering, electrical engineering, so I traced the history of those people, those inventions, and what really fascinated me the most is why there were so many different revolutionary scientific people and revolutionary scientific concepts and discoveries that came out of this relatively small part of the world in this relatively brief period of time. And so I looked at some of the approaches that were taken by German universities and industry and government at that time that really promoted the education, the equipping, the funding, the rewarding of these scientists and engineers, and kind of drew parallels with what the United States or other places could do nowadays to try to improve scientific research.
And that's available on your website as well.
Yes, so the website here, writerinstitute.org, you can download the whole book, so over 6,000 pages. You can download the slides I showed you today. And again, today we just talked about sites that are located within the modern borders of Germany. So on my website, I also have slides on sites located in Austria and sites in modern Poland, and sites in modern Czech territory. If you want, I can go back, I can come back sometime, tell you about some of those. But otherwise, you can download the slides and be off to Europe with a backpack and go explore some of these places. Or maybe Ray can lead tours for these.
I hear you, and we will take you up on that follow up when we have another class coming later in the year. Let's go ahead and pull your slides down. Stop sharing your screen, if you will,
Sure.
and this should bring us up. And I would encourage any of you that have any thoughts or questions or any comments. So we've got just a few more minutes, and you've got Todd here with us. So please just unmute yourself and start asking your questions. All right? I'll give you a few minutes to do that.
Don't everybody ask at once. Let me point out that a lot of this does really tie into Oak Ridge history. So there's so many parallels between what was done at Oak Ridge and what was done at these German sites. As I said, like gaseous diffusion. So at Oak Ridge, you had gaseous diffusion, the K25 plant, and the nickel membrane filters. And at these German sites, they were producing nickel membrane filters, seemingly doing gaseous diffusion someplace. And there are so many parallels that Percival Keith, the chief designer of the gas diffusion plant at Oak Ridge, after the war, was tapped by Leslie Groves to go on a super secret mission. So in, I think, 1946, Percival Keith was sent to Czech territory, which at the time was controlled by the Russians. So why would you send the guy who knew how to build Oak Ridge into Russian-controlled territory in 1946? You'd send somebody else. You wouldn't send somebody that valuable if he was captured by the Russians. But Leslie Groves decided that Percival Keith was the only person suitable for this special assignment. So sent this Oak Ridge designer in to Czech territory, Russian-controlled Czech territory in 1946. And the only explanation I can come up with is there must have been some former German facility located there. Again, Germany controlled all of Czech territory during the war, and then the Russians rolled in. But there must have been some former German facility there that required the very specific expertise of Percival Keith. So, say a gaseous diffusion facility there using these nickel membrane filters. And so Keith was sent on this 2-week top secret mission by Leslie Groves. He did it. We have no record of what he found or what he did. All we have is the one letter from Groves saying, "Here, go there," and he did. But if anybody wants to go digging around in the archives at Oak Ridge, maybe you could actually find, the memoirs of Percival Keith, or find other information from Oak Ridge from its archives related to the German nuclear program. And then also after the war, many of the documents of the German nuclear program were collected in Europe and shipped back to Oak Ridge for study and storage. And I think some of those, or at least copies of them, have been given back to the German government since then. But there's probably still a lot rattling around in Oak Ridge. So if you guys are interested in the topic, you could do a lot of research there just within Oak Ridge.
All of those documents would likely have been placed in the National Archives in Atlanta. A lot of Oak Ridge documents went there. David Sperry, I think you've unmuted yourself. You have a question?
Well, just the premise of forgotten creators, or the observation of what was it that was the environment that generated that much creative thought and innovation. And the second part that's related to that is just the vast amount of effort and expenditure, human energy that went into destructive forces. And so the real question is, what if we turn that creative environment into human development for the planet as a whole. And it just the contrast between what is and what could be is just astounding. That's what came out of this presentation for me.
Yes, I definitely agree that we should use scientific creativity for constructive purposes to help people. And historically, there has been some funding, some work along those lines, but that's nothing compared to the amount of funding you can get if you scare people. Well, you have to give me this funding for my science research, or else the world is going to blow up, or the bad guys are going to blow us up before we blow them up. So even in the U.S., if you look at the history of funding, and not just weapons, but think about the highways. So the highways, the Eisenhower interstate system was built as the National Defense, Interstate Act and so forth. So it was nominally done, motivated by national defense reasons, not just because it'd be useful to have roads between the various states so we can all drive on without hitting too many potholes. Or education, especially after Sputnik in 57, National Defense Education Act. Because of national defense and military reasons, we have to educate our kids, not just because it is a good thing to educate our kids, so they know something they can have useful, productive lives. So unfortunately, there has been this longstanding human tendency to only act if people are sufficiently scared to act. So I agree that's a problem. Now, in terms of forgotten creators, yes, I did go looking for reasons why so many creative scientists, so many revolutionary innovations came out of this one small place, this one brief time. And I have a whole separate slide presentation on that. I can give you guys if you're curious, or you can download it from my website. But just briefly, I identified about 10 different factors. I won't drag you through all of them here. But think about modern science education. So if you get a PhD in science or engineering in the United States now, you might be, 30-ish by the time you finally get your PhD. And then you have to spend a couple years doing a postdoc someplace. And then nowadays, you have to spend a couple more years doing another postdoc someplace else, and maybe a couple more years doing another postdoc. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll get to be an assistant professor someplace, and you're fighting for tenure for 7 years. So according to an NIH NSF study I saw a few years ago, the average age at which a US scientist receives their first independent grant, so their first funding that gives them independence to do their own ideas, what they really, really want to do for themselves, the average age at which that first happens for a US scientist or engineer is in the early 40s. And it's astounding. So they've spent their entire life up to that point, up to the early 40s, simply doing what their professors, their thesis advisor, their postdoc advisors, their various people told them to do. It's not until the early 40s that they're given independence to finally do something creative and independent. And it's kind of like think about Olympic ice skating or think about concert level pianists. So if you had somebody who was supposed to be a concert pianist, and up until the early 40s, they could only watch and be told what they were supposed to do at the piano. They couldn't actually go touch the piano, tinkle around, be creative for themselves. Olympic ice skaters would be Olympic ice skaters, could only watch and be told what they were supposed to do, not go practice it, learn it, do it for themselves. It's really not practical to have suddenly people be world-class creative scientists for the very first time in their mid-40s onward. If you look at the German system, most of the German scientists and engineers that I studied received their PhD at about age 22. Think of this. And then they didn't jump through decades of postdocs and things. They went straight to work. I mean, Werner von Braun was put directly in charge of the rocket program. And Hans von Ohain was put directly in charge of developing jet engines. And people were put directly in charge of developing sulfa antibiotics and directly in charge of inventing transistors and things. So you had scientists who were 22 or in their mid-20s who were now given the resources to do anything they wanted. And they were very young. They had lots of energy. They had lots of time. And more importantly, there's a large difference in where you are in your life in your early 20s versus mid 40s. Mid 40s, you have a family, you have all kinds of committee meetings you have to go to, you have a mortgage and everything. In your early 20s, you have a lot more free time, a lot more energy, and so they could really focus on these innovations. And so that was one major factor. There were other factors, but generally, the German-speaking system really actively recruited young kids to become scientists. It was kind of like, what the United States might hold up as athletes nowadays, or, as race car drivers or something. But well, wow, you can be a rocket engineer when you grow up. And so they really actively recruited kids to become scientists, really trained them to become independent creative scientists. And then, come age 22 or something, they cut them loose with their own funding to actually do it. And if they succeeded, they were rewarded, vastly rewarded and featured on magazine covers and things. That's very different than what the United States did historically, certainly quite different than what the United States tends to do now.
Very good. Thank you. Any other quick comment? We're about at the end of our time. Todd, we thank you so much for coming and appreciate your offer to do that again. I'll let you know when our next series is, and we'll include you there.
Thank you.
All right. Very good, folks. Thank you much. And I will put this up on YouTube, and the link will be sent out. And Todd, I'll share the link with you.
Thank you.
All right. Let's start.